The air in the living room hung thick with the scent of stale pizza and unspoken accusations. Sarah sat on the edge of the sofa, her hands clasped tightly in her lap, her eyes darting everywhere but at me. I could feel the knot in my stomach tighten with each word I didn't say, each breath I held in. "It was just a party, Mark," she'd said, her voice a practiced nonchalance. "A get-together with some work friends." I'd always trusted Sarah. Completely. We'd been together since college, weathering the storms of young adulthood together, building a life, a home, a future. There were struggles, of course, but those we had faced together, like a team. Now, I realized with a sickening lurch, I hadn't really known her at all. It wasn't just the party, the way she'd been lately. The guarded phone calls, the late nights at the office, the way she'd flinch when I'd reach for her in bed. There was an emptiness in her eyes, a hollowness that had replaced the spark I had once loved. My friend, David, had been the one to plant the seed of doubt, casually mentioning he'd seen Sarah at some bar downtown last Saturday. I'd brushed it off, attributing it to mistaken identity. But the seed had taken root, a toxic vine wrapping itself around my heart. I'd asked her about it. Sarah's eyes had gone wide with feigned surprise. Then she laughed. "Oh, that must have been another Sarah. I was at home all night." That's when the doubt morphed into a sickening certainty. And then, a few days later, I found it. A text message on her phone, left carelessly open. It was a group message, a thread of vulgar jokes and explicit details, all from the previous weekend. The sender was some guy I'd never heard of, but the messages were clear, sickeningly clear. Sarah was there, at a party she told me she didn't attend. With a group of men she lied about even knowing. My blood ran cold. The knot in my stomach tightened. I looked at Sarah, her carefully constructed facade starting to crumble. The work party wasn't with work colleagues but with men, not just one, but six. 6 other men. A wave of nausea washed over me. How could this happen? I didn't yell at man. I didn't cry. I didn't even raise my voice. I simply felt a profound, almost unbearable, coldness. It was like a part of me had died, the part that believed in love, in loyalty, in us. "A party," I repeated, my voice barely a whisper, each word dripping with a painful irony. "Right. A party." I spent the next few weeks in a haze of disbelief and hurt. I went to work. I ate, I slept. But I felt like I was moving through a fog, my senses dulled, my emotions muted. I couldn't bring myself to confront Sarah again. I couldn't stand to even look at her. The betrayal was too raw, the wound too deep. One night, I was scrolling through my phone when I stumbled across an old email from a private investigator. I'd considered hiring one years ago after a strange incident with Sarah and a colleague, but had ultimately decided not to follow through. Now the email seemed like a sign. An idea started to take shape, a plan to unravel the lies and face the truth. I hired the investigator, providing him with the name of the bar where Sarah had been seen and the information I'd gleaned from the text messages. I paid for expedited delivery, desperate to have the answers I knew were out there. The investigator's report arrived a week later. It was more detailed and explicit than I had anticipated. There were photos of Sarah, not just at the bar but going into a hotel room with several different men. Her face flushed, her hand holding another man's hand, her body language, everything a wife shouldn't be when away from her husband. There were names and addresses and detailed accounts of what happened in that room. The report laid bare the extent of Sarah's deceit. It wasn't just one night, it was a pattern, a callous disregard for our marriage, for me. The coldness inside me solidified into something else, a quiet resolve. This wasn't just about anger anymore. It was about justice. Not the kind that involved violence, but a meticulously crafted retribution, a systematic dismantling of the life she had built on lies. I started small. I opened a new bank account, slowly moving our savings into it. I contacted our lawyer, quietly drawing up papers. I didn't tell her. I didn't even hint. But I let her continue with her pretense of normalcy, a charade we both were now a part of, although only I knew that. I took a sick pleasure in watching her go through her routine as if things were normal. She went to work, she made dinner, she talked about her day, all the while completely oblivious to the seismic shift happening beneath her feet. The final piece of my plan took months to develop. She and her family planned on a big vacation to Mexico with all the trimmings. A big family getaway. Sarah had been so excited. She wouldn't stop talking about it. Every night she'd come home from work and rant and rave about the various parts of the trip and how it was all going to happen. I didn't comment. I listened. I worked out the dates of the trip and what it entailed. I contacted all of Sarah's family and told them that I had a big announcement to make about Sarah and me. I told them I'd prefer to make it in person. I even coordinated flights and accommodation for them to get here and to the venue. And I paid for it all. Finally, the day arrived. The family was in town. Sarah was still blissfully unaware. I had rented out the back room of our favorite Italian restaurant. The entire family sat at the table, with an odd assortment of smiles and confusion. I stood at the head of the table, a single white envelope in my hand. Sarah sat next to me, a curious smile on her face, her fingers interlocked with mine. I gently pulled my hand away and stood tall. I looked down at her, and then at her family. Thank you all for being here. I've called you all here today because I have an announcement to make regarding my wife, Sarah. Coot. I could hear the air being sucked out of the room. Her family shifted uncomfortably. They had no idea what was about to come. Sarah squeezed my hand, her smile still in place. Oh, Mark, you're so dramatic. Tell them already. I took a deep breath and opened the envelope. Inside was a small memory card and a letter. I held the memory card up so everyone could see this. This is the memory card that contains the details of Sarah's recent business trip. There are photos, videos, and text messages, all of which document all the events of that trip and who she took the trip with. The letter provides additional context. Wait. I looked at Sarah. Her smile was gone, replaced with a pale look of terror. Her jaw hung open. She looked at me, her eyes wide with fear. She knew. She knew I knew. I nodded to the waiter. He walked in with a large screen and projector. He turned off the main lights and started the presentation. I watched as Sarah's face contorted in a mixture of shame and horror. The photos were explicit, the videos incriminating, and the text messages filled with vulgar details of her betrayal. Her family gasped, their faces a mixture of disbelief and disgust. I watched as they reeled. I watched them looking at their daughter, their sister. I watched them as they looked at me. I knew I was the sympathetic character here. They could all see that. The presentation ended. The room was silent, save for the sounds of Sarah's shallow breaths. I looked at her, my gaze cold and unforgiving. I want a divorce, I said, my voice clear and steady. No. And I'm taking everything. I turned to her parents. I've already had a conversation with her lawyer, and the process is already underway. I'm going to be filing papers as soon as I'm done here. I'm so sorry you had to find out about your daughter this way. But I couldn't keep it to myself anymore. I could see her father looking at Sarah in disgust, shaking his head as he turned back to me. I am sorry for the way our family has treated you. Thank you for showing us the truth. He didn't make eye contact with Sarah. I stood up and took a moment to look at all of her family, each member staring at Sarah in shame, disappointment, and disgust. Then I walked out, leaving her to face the wreckage she had created. I felt no joy, no exhilaration, only a quiet sense of peace. The process was just beginning, but I was finally free. I was finally in control. And that, I realized, was a revenge more satisfying than any other. I drove away, leaving Sarah and her family in the restaurant. I never looked back. I knew that her shame and regret would be a heavier burden for her to carry than any pain I could ever inflict. I had simply opened the door. She would forever live with what she had done. My life was moving forward and I knew I was going to be okay.